Let's go live. All right, welcome to those of us joining us on YouTube as well, and those of you who've signed on to our Zoom chat. Welcome everyone to the June 26th Saturday night star party. Technically up at the center of the universe, so I think only one of us is up there now. We're all hiding out from the heat in our respective domiciles as I guess as close to the ground as we can get, so we're not up in the heat. I see some of our panelists are even outside in the shade. Yeah, so I'd like to get started with an acknowledgement of the land our center is situated upon. We're on the traditional territories of the Coast Salish and the Kwangan-speaking peoples, who are the custodians of these lands and waters. This area has long been the gathering place of the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Sanic nations, long before the arrivals of Europeans. We are grateful to have the opportunity to work, collaborate, and learn here, and we respect the continued connections with the past, present, and future in the ongoing relationships with Indigenous and other peoples within the British Columbia community. We invite all attendees tonight to reflect on the relationships that you have to the communities that inhabit this land and share the night sky and wonder. All right, and I think to start off our announcements today, we have a quick update on our school tours from Calvin.
Yep, I'll let myself in here. Just as some background music started playing outside. All right, hello everybody. So I wanted to talk about the school tours that we've been doing for the past year and a bit. We've been providing online tours for schools. We've also been doing what's called the Canadian Youth Exploring Space session, where students can actually speak directly with scientists in the work. And so we schedule those to meet the classes and the scientists. So the school year has ended, or I think ended just recently. So we've done a combined total of 76 tours and sessions for both the tours and the Canyas. And that's 1,500 students in total. Most of those are from around Victoria, the classes that would normally meet us in person for tours and things, but some are from outside of Victoria, some are even outside of BC, like Yukon, Alberta, and Manitoba. So for the next school year, we will probably have in-person tours again, I hope.
Hopefully.
But we will also plan to provide online school tours and Canya sessions as well, because we've now made those connections with those people not close to us. So that way those from outside Victoria are still able to take tours and things. So we're still going to figure out how we're going to set that all up, but that's the plan. So that's all I wanted to say.
Yeah, looking forward to getting back up in the center with tour groups, and it's great that we have the infrastructure now to reach across the globe.
Yeah, we kind of get both now.
Yeah. All right. I'd like to remind everyone watching us on YouTube to please like and subscribe to the video. That really helps us reach more people when we do these star parties, and we'll be doing them for the rest of the summer. And hopefully we'll be incorporating some online part of star parties in the years to come as well. You can also find us on social media, pretty much anywhere at using the tag @FriendsDAO. That's our username for most places. And our next talk for next week, or sorry, 2 weeks from now, is going to be from Steve Mayers, Spaceman Steve, a UVic alum who's living in Hawaii now, working at one of the telescopes there. As well, we are fully supported, or mostly supported, by memberships and donations from our community. If you're interested in contributing, please go to our webpage, centeroftheuniverse.org, and you can find all the information on how to donate or become a supporting member there. We're also looking for volunteers. We've got a bunch of projects that we're going to be putting back into gear as we prepare to welcome people in person to the center again. Still don't have a firm timeline on that, but we want to make sure it's as big, bright, and beautiful as possible for all of the folks we're welcoming back. If you'd like to help out with that, please, again, go to our centeroftheuniverse.org webpage and click the Contact tab. We'd love to hear from you and find out how you can help. Let's see. Let me go over the itinerary for tonight. So first up, we're going to have our main talk about the Astronomy Technology Group in the big green building with Scott Roberts and Jenny Atwood. I don't know if Coven, do you want to spotlight their video briefly so I can wave hi?
Absolutely, add them. Yep.
Awesome. We've also got, after that, we'll be talking about the recent lunar eclipse on June 10th, and I'll be presenting that one. We've also, then we'll be briefly chatting about the, Laurie and Pat will be chatting about the solstice that's just passed as well on June 21st. And then after that, we've got Ask an Astronomer with Ruhi and Ben. Excellent. And David Lee will be giving us a brief description of what's up in the sky after that. There's David. And then David will lead us from there into talking about EAA, electronically assisted astronomy, and showing us some cool pictures from that group. With Randy and Mike Nash, or Randy Enkin and Mike Nash. Excellent, so that's our panel. If you have any questions during the course of tonight, please feel free to toss those into the chat, either on Zoom or on YouTube. Our moderators will be watching that and will pass those questions along. If your question isn't answered right away or is part of the main talk or any of the other ones, it may be that we've held on to that question. It may require a bit more in-depth answer, and we'll be passing it along to our Ask an Astronomer folks. You can also toss in any questions you might have about astronomy, life, the universe, everything, maybe what we had for lunch, although I can't guarantee that one will get to us. Those will go to our Ask an Astronomer group as well. All right, and without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Ben to introduce our main speakers for the evening.
Yes, well, good evening, everybody. I wanted to, in introducing Scott and Jenny, I wanted to talk a little bit about the Astronomy Technology Group. Of course, they will tell you much more about this than I can. But it's one of the prides of Victoria and the DAO that we have so much advanced technology that's actually being developed here in Victoria. And not many people know who live in Victoria how much is actually going on here. Victoria is the center for the development of instruments for large telescopes around the world. In particular, and Scott is the latest leader of this effort, and Jenny is also a internationally known designer of large instruments. The latest one that she's involved in is NFIRAOS, which is such a great acronym, or at least such a great pronunciation. And I forget the complete acronym, she'll tell you later, but it's one of the large instruments that's going to be mounted in the 30-meter telescope on the summit of Mauna Kea sometime in the next, I don't know how long. The Astronomy Technology Group is one of those activities. It has instruments that are being built for telescopes in the Southern Hemisphere through the Square Kilometre Array, and the Gemini telescopes, which are both in the north and the south, and the 30-meter telescope, which is going to be in Hawaii. Scott has over 25 experiences in this area. including development for those instruments. And Jenny has been at NRC for 15 years. As I said, is the lead optical engineer for a major instrument on TMT and other, and also the IRIS on instrument wavefront sensor. And is also, you know, previously one of our partners in public outreach in Victoria. So welcome to both of them, and you have a treat in store for you. Okay, that's too silent. Scott, would you like to lead off, or is Jenny gonna start up?
I think I'll go ahead, and then Jenny will follow up with the integration facility talk. So thank you, Ben, for the introduction. I'll share my screen here. Okay, is that coming through?
Yep.
Okay, great. So thanks again for the introduction. What I was planning to do tonight was to tell you a bit about our group, the Astronomy Technology group in Victoria. And if I use the acronym ATD, that's what I'm referring to is our group. I was going to tell you a bit about our sites, our Victoria site and our Penticton site. And then I spent a little bit of time talking about the wavelengths we observe at and why we observe with radio telescopes, optical telescopes, and from space. And then based on that, I'm going to give you some examples of the projects we're working on, one in radio astronomy, one in optical astronomy, one in space astronomy, and then talk a little bit about our research and development. So as I mentioned, we have two sites for the Herzberg Astronomy and Astrophysics Research Center, which is part of the National Research Council. The Victoria site, and if you live around here, you're probably quite familiar with this dome that you can see from many locations in the city. And then in Penticton at White Lake, we have our radio observatory, and our team works at both these locations in our development of instrumentation for telescopes. And we have a mandate from the Government of Canada to operate and administer astronomical observatories for our university researchers and the general community. And so our group, the Astronomy Technology group, is developing instruments and telescopes that fit within this mandate. Okay, so this is just a quick tour of the Penticton site. So as I mentioned, the Penticton site is focused on radio astronomy, and there are a few observatories located there. One is the Synthesis Telescope. Another one is the Chime Observatory that you may have heard a lot about in the news recently for its discovery of fast radio bursts. That's located on the site up there. And then we also have our main office building there and several labs and facilities, including a fairly large facility that we build carbon fiber and fiberglass dishes for radio telescopes. And that you can see a picture of that in the video at the bottom here, one of the telescopes that we've recently commissioned at the site there. And then in Victoria, again, this is the dome for the Plaskett telescope, our 1.8 meter telescope there. And these are our office building and laboratories in Victoria. And from another view here, you can see the office building here. And then this is the large integration facility that Jenny's going to be talking about. That's now located here. In Victoria, we have the offices and the labs here, but we also have a machine shop here with very skilled tool and die makers who help us make our instruments in Victoria. This is a picture of the interior of the new integration facility, and it doesn't exist yet, but this is an image of the very large adaptive optics system, an instrument called IRIS that we're currently developing for the 30-meter telescope. So this is how big it's going to be inside that large facility. So this is just a picture to show the current Canadian telescopes that are available for use by the community. And several of them are located in Victoria and Penticton, and then others are located at excellent sites for observations, including Hawaii and Chile. So in Victoria, the dome that I just showed you, if you look inside there, you'll see the Plaskett telescope, which is 1.8 meter telescope here. In Victoria, we also have a 1.2 meter McKellar telescope that's in a separate dome on the hill. In Penticton, we have a 26 meter Gault radio telescope. And we have an observatory that measures solar flux, and has been doing that for since 1947, a very key measurement that's used by many different people across the globe. And then the synthesis telescope is a radio telescope array that's been in use in Penticton since 1995. And then, of course, the CHIME telescope that I mentioned, with its discovery of many fast radio bursts in recent years. And then in Hawaii, on the top of Mauna Kea, we have the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope. And then we have access to two Gemini 8-meter telescopes, one on Mauna Kea in Hawaii, very close to where the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope is. And then a second copy of this telescope in the southern hemisphere in Chile on a mountain called Cerro Pachon. In addition, we have Canada is a partner in the Atacama Large Millimeter Array called ALMA, the acronym. And I'll talk more about that later with some of the development we've done for that telescope. So in addition to our existing observatories, the Canadian Astronomical Society has made recommendations to the government for future observatories that that Canada will be involved in. And those include the 30-meter telescope and the square kilometer array, and a space observatory called CASTOR, which I'll be talking about in the coming slides. But there's also other missions that I won't be talking about tonight, that are also prioritized by the Canadian Astronomical Society for development. And we've got involvement in most of these projects. So to talk a little bit about our team, we have about 66 people working in Victoria and Penticton on various projects, and I'll talk more about those, but we're a group of engineers, scientists, and technicians and support staff who work together to build and design and build instruments and telescope systems for Canadian researchers. Here's just some of the pictures of our group, and this picture on the bottom is a commissioning of an instrument, and it just shows the excitement that we have after working on an instrument for many years, and to finally see it working on the sky is really the reason we're all so passionate about this job, and excited to see new capabilities being developed. So I'll just very quickly to give you a little bit more information about who we are. Of course, the main thing we are is the people we are and the teams that we have, and we have teams with expertise in various areas. Jenny is a member of the optical engineering team, but we also have teams working in mechanical engineering, electronics, software, science and projects, and developing radio receivers, detectors, and adaptive optics systems. So it's really the people who we are. But what we pride ourselves on is collaborations, and most of the projects we work on are collaborations between many partners, both universities and industry in Canada, but also international partners on some of our larger projects. We have both science and technology in our group. We have people doing active science research and technology development. And we pride ourselves on innovation and excellence. And we also are supported by NRC very well with excellent facilities and laboratories in which we can develop and build our instruments. And I'm very pleased with our logo. We had a competition last year to develop a logo for our group, and one of our very clever engineers came up with this. But it really illustrates who we are in the sense that the top of this image represents the science of astronomy, and the bottom represents the technology of developing instrumentation for observatories. And then the right-hand side represents optical astronomy with a typical telescope dome, and the left-hand side represents radio astronomy with an image of the Chime Observatory reflector here. So it's a sort of a symbiotic yin-yang image that I think very well captures who we are. This is a slide showing some of the projects that we've been involved in the past, and some that we're currently involved in. And generally, all of our projects have logos, which are kind of fun to look at, and we have fun with some of the names, as you'll see on the picture here. But just to give you a quick tour, and I should again mention that many or most of these projects are collaborations between ourselves and other groups. So I'm not mentioning all of our partners in here, but suffice to say we do a lot of collaboration, and we wouldn't be able to do these things without our partnerships with other groups. But this box here shows our development of what's called a correlator for the Very Large Array in New Mexico. And I'll talk more about correlators later, but this is something that we delivered several years ago, and was really the source of our involvement in building a correlator for the square kilometer array, which is currently under development. And we're doing various bits of work for this project, including the correlator, working on digitization of the radio signals, and then building receivers for the so-called low noise amplifiers for receivers for this telescope. Then there's a 30-meter telescope, which the large integration and test area that Jenny will talk about will be the first usage of that facility to build this very large adaptive optics system for the 30-meter telescope. And I'll talk more about TMT in an upcoming slide. For the ALMA observatory that I mentioned, we built one of the most used receiver bands for that observatory called Band 3. And that's been working on that observatory for several years now. And we have a long history of developing instruments for the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope, including cameras and spectrographs and adaptive optics systems. We do work in space astronomy, including recently for the James Webb Space Telescope, which is going to be launched this fall. And also, I'm going to talk about the Castor Space Telescope, which is just getting started now, but hopefully will be launched in this decade. I mentioned our Dominion Radio Astrophysical Observatory site. We're currently working on an upgrade to the Chime telescope called CHORD, which adds 500 6-meter dishes to that observatory, plus several other what we call outriggers, or telescopes at other sites spread across the continent that will help us localize the source of fast radio bursts. And then the Gemini Observatory, we've developed several instruments for, including planet finding instruments, spectrographs, adaptive optics systems, and we're currently working on an instrument called GEARMOS, which is an infrared multi-object spectrograph for that observatory. And then we also have partnerships with other observatories, including the Japanese Subaru Telescope and the European Southern Observatory. So before I get into some specific examples, I wanted to talk a little bit about the reason why we have different types of telescopes and why we sometimes observe from space and sometimes from ground. And this is I'll give you some more feeling for these wavelengths we're talking about here in the next slide. But this is what we call the electromagnetic spectrum that bridges wavelengths of light from very short wavelengths, very high energy wavelengths, right out to very long wavelength radio waves. And this is a plot showing the opacity of the atmosphere. So when it says 100% here, it means you can't see through the atmosphere. So if your eyes were tuned to these wavelengths, you wouldn't be able to see very far through our atmosphere. You'd get blocked by the atmosphere itself and wouldn't be able to see very far. And that's why our eyes are, one of the reasons our eyes are sensitive in this range of about 0.4 to about 0.7 microns. You can see the rainbow here of the spectrum that our eyes are sensitive to, and this is where we can see with our eyes. And a lot of astronomy is done in this band from the ground. And then you'll see as we go to the right of here to longer wavelengths that we call the infrared, there's areas where we can see through the atmosphere and areas where the atmosphere is quite opaque. So there's what we call different bands in here where we can see through the atmosphere, and we can have ground-based telescopes that look through here. But in these regions to the left of the visible wavelengths that we call the ultraviolet, or down here we're into X-rays or gamma rays, we can't see through the atmosphere. So we have to put telescopes into space if we want to do observations in these wavelength ranges. And similarly, if we look at the gap between radio waves, where we can see quite a large spectrum or range of wavelengths here with radio telescopes, between the optical, infrared, and the radio, there's a range here that's also completely blocked. And that's where, again, we have telescopes operating in space. And I mentioned the James Webb Space Telescope earlier, but it will observe in this wavelength range in the infrared, and provide excellent observations in that range. So again, the radio telescopes I'm talking about will be operating in these longer wavelengths, and then the optical telescopes, like the 30-meter telescope, are operating in the optical and near infrared wavelengths. So just to give you a feeling for what the sizes these wavelengths are, first of all, if we go down to kind of X-rays, the X-rays wavelength is around a nanometer, and that's approximately the same as if it's about the growth of a fingernail in a second, or it's about the size of a gold atom. It's a little bit smaller than that, but that's the kind of range we're talking about here. And then as we get towards the ultraviolet, viruses are around the size of a few hundred nanometers. And then bacteria are a few microns in size. So this is kind of the range that when we talk about optical wavelengths of light, that's the kind of length we're talking about. And then this range in here in the far infrared, we're looking at wavelengths of light that are kind of the diameter of a human hair, or about 75 microns. And then as we get out to the radio wavelengths, we're in sort of the meter size, so sizes of people, or perhaps some of our local neighbors in the universe, if we ever can meet them. So given that, the first thing I'll talk about is our observations at radio wavelengths, and I'll talk a little bit about the square kilometer array. But before I get to that, I'll just mention a few things about how radio telescopes work. So they work by very similar to optical telescopes. The light comes in and bounces off what we call a primary mirror, or primary reflector, bounces up to what we call a subreflector, or a secondary mirror, and then bounces into a feed horn for a radio telescope. And then the signal that comes into there gets sent to to a receiver and gets amplified. And then that gets processed by computer systems to make observations of the sky. So sometimes radio telescopes are single dishes that are able to observe the sky and make observations. But sometimes they're radio interferometers. And what we mean by that is that we're able to combine signals from many different radio telescopes to synthesize an image as though the primary reflector of the interferometer was the size of the full array itself. So rather than be limited by a primary reflector that may be a few tens of meters across, we can synthesize as though we're observing with a telescope that's many kilometers across. And this allows us to make much more higher resolution images of the sky and do science that wouldn't be possible with individual reflectors. But in order to be able to do this, we need to be able to take the signals from each of these individual radio dishes and combine them into a single synthesized image. And that's the job of what we call the correlator, which I mentioned we built for the Very Large Array, and we're building for the SKA. So the correlator is a supercomputer that takes all these signals and synthesizes them together to make it appear as though we're observing with a single dish. And a couple of examples of radio arrays are the ALMA telescope that I mentioned, and this is the Jansky Very Large Array that we built the correlator for previously, and you may remember this array from the movie Contact that Jodie Foster was in. So stepping into the future, we're very excited to be involved in the Square Kilometer Array, and this is the mid-frequency of that array is located in South Africa. It will be located in South Africa, it's not built yet. And then the low frequency array will be located in Western Australia. But the Square Kilometer Array is the name is implying that you can achieve a square kilometer of collecting area with a single telescope. And the first implementation of this is going to be nearly 200 dishes that are 15 meters in diameter each dish, but located over many hundreds of kilometers across the South Africa, and be able to, with a correlator, be able to synthesize these together into an image. So the magic behind that is developed by our team in Penticton, and we call it the this is the correlator and beamformer for the Square Kilometer Array, and it was designed by the team in Penticton. And it's the heart of the processing of the Square Kilometer Array Observatory. It's based on this board that was completely custom designed by the team here and developed, and it's a lot of hardware development, but there's also a lot of programming to develop the code that runs on these boards and is able to process all this data. These are very high-speed processing boards based on an Intel Stratix 10 processor, which is an extremely high-speed processor. But we still need 520 of these boards to do the correlation for the Square Kilometer Array. And that because the data rate of that telescope is going to be 20 terabits per second. And to give you some perspective of that, that's equivalent to 9 million Netflix streams simultaneously and continuously. So that's the amount of data that's coming through this telescope and the amount that we have to process with these boards. This is a very nice image that was made with a precursor for the Square Kilometer Array called the Meerkat telescope, looking at the center of our galaxy. And these are some of the exciting science and images that we can expect from this observatory. Okay, so moving on to optical wavelengths, optical and infrared wavelengths. This is the 30-meter telescope, and very similar to a radio telescope. We've got a primary reflector, a secondary reflector, and then a mirror that sends light into instruments. But in this case, the primary mirror is 30 meters in diameter, And it's made up of 492 1.4 meter hexagonal mirror segments that are each individually supported and aligned to a few nanometers of precision. Just to give you some idea of the size, a hockey rink is about 60 meters long, which is about the length from here to here. And it's about 25 meters wide. So it's a little bit, a hockey rink is a little bit narrower than the diameter of this mirror. So when you're watching Montreal beat Florida on Monday, you can think about the hockey rink and how the 30-meter telescope would about fit on that platform there. So this is a very nice dome that was designed for the 30-meter telescope. It's also been designed in Canada by a company called Dynamic Structures in Port Coquitlam. But our contribution is the adaptive optics system. And adaptive optics is a technology that corrects the images that are transmitted through the atmosphere. And as you can see, if this is 30 meters, this is still a very big instrument. And this is the size of a very large room or even a small house that we're building here. So this is a picture, a close-up of the NFIRAOS instrument showing its stairways to get up to it and instruments that are mounted to the adaptive optics system. And as I mentioned, adaptive optics is used to correct the light coming through our atmosphere that gets distorted as it travels between a star and the primary mirror of the telescope. And the way it works is we have very high speed, about 1,000 times a second mirrors that are able to change shape. They were able to measure with what we call a wavefront sensor the distortion of the atmosphere and feed that back to these mirrors that very quickly correct the image and send a corrected wavefront to these cameras. And this is the key technology that enables the science of something like the 30-meter telescope. And it's really the sole reason, the compelling reason to build such a large telescope is because we have the power of adaptive optics. So again, our group is responsible for delivering this instrument, and again, we're providing really the central, the core instrument for this observatory. This is a picture of the optical design and layout of the NFIRAOS instrument with multiple mirrors and deformable mirrors and tip-tilt mirrors. And then the light eventually comes out of here and gets passed to instruments that are mounted on the side of the adaptive optics system. This is just a close-up showing the structure that holds this. And again, this is large enough for people to move around inside here to service this. But we've put many years of design into the instrument, and we're ready to build it now. And here's just another picture of it with a close-up showing some people standing on these platforms to give you an idea of the size of this instrument. And again, Jenny will show you the integration and test area and how this will fit inside this new building we're building. So moving on to space telescopes. I mentioned the Castor Space Telescope before. It's a new mission that's being proposed by Canada and with an international partnership. And its goal is to observe in ultraviolet wavelengths. So if you look at, again, this is the electromagnetic spectrum I was showing before, but here it's just showing from a few tenths of a micron out to a couple of microns, showing where the James Webb Space Telescope will observe, and showing that Castor will fill in with very high sensitivity and efficiency the ultraviolet part of our visible spectrum and provide science in areas that currently aren't available with other observatories. And Castor telescope itself has a very big field of view by astronomy standards. We can image about the size of a full moon with a single image of Castor, whereas this is a comparison of what the size of the field of the Hubble Space Telescope. So looking at a galaxy with 6 observations here with Castor, you can image the galaxy, whereas you'd need hundreds of observations from the Hubble Space Telescope. So we're involved in this project by in a couple of areas. One is working on optical designs for the telescope itself, And then we're also involved in some of the development of detectors for the mission. And it's a Canadian Space Agency mission, but we often participate with Canadian Space Agency in these types of projects. Okay, so quickly moving on, I just see I've got a couple of minutes here. We also, aside from building and delivering instruments to existing or soon to be existing observatories, we also do a lot of research and development in our group, and that's so that we're ready for new observatories that come around, and also so that we can propose new types of instruments and technologies that aren't currently used on telescopes, so that we can increase the science potential of existing and future telescopes. So we have an active area of research and development in several areas, including designing radio antennas, signal processing of radio and radio receivers, and a lot of work in optical and infrared telescopes and instrumentation, and also adaptive optics. And this just shows some of our lab facilities and dish development and adaptive optics, planet finding instruments that we're developing, and receivers for radio telescopes. But I wanted to talk about just one thing very quickly. One of the very exciting developments we're involved in is called a spectral correlation sensor. And this is an idea to put a whole instrument on a single microchip. So instead of just building a great big instrument like NFIRAOS, we're seeing the possibility with what we call Astrophotonics to build instruments into basically integrated circuits. And the way this instrument is that if we got light from an extrasolar planet, so for example, if we use the 30-meter telescope to produce an image of a extrasolar planet orbiting in front of a star, we could actually probe that to see what kind of gases are in its atmosphere. And for example, if we're looking for something like hydrogen cyanide, which is a biomarker, it has absorption lines that are spread across the spectrum here. And what this correlation sensor does is it has a selective throughput of transmission through here. So the light comes in, but only certain wavelengths of the light are allowed to come out. So by aligning this comb, this frequency comb, with the spectra of a particular molecule, we can detect whether or not we're seeing this. So we can move these lines back and forth, left to right. And when they align with these absorption lines, you see a dip in the light curve. And it's a very sensitive way to measure the throughput of the system and detect these gases in atmospheres. And we can have a whole array of these, looking for different gases from the atmosphere of an extrasolar planet. And that's just an idea that we have. That we're in development right now. We're doing some testing to see if we can detect gases in the atmosphere of Venus this summer. And if that works out, we'll probably start towards developing an instrument for something like the 30-meter telescope in the future. So I think I'll stop there, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present to you. And I'll pass this off to Jenny to talk about the integration and test area.
Okay. How's that? So I will be talking today about the big green building on top of the hill. This is a near and dear thing because NFIRAOS has been one of my projects for many, many years now. And so being in charge of the new building is quite an honor. So I'm going to go through basically the construction of the building and a few pictures of what it looks like, and then discuss NFIRAOS a little bit and what our plans are for building it there. So the construction started in 2016, and there used to be quite a few trees across the way. So we cleared that site at that time, which was a good marker for a first step of building the new building. And then in 2018, we actually started clearing rock. And so we started blasting. That took a bit of time to get through all that rock and create a nice clear flat space. And then the foundations started going in. And so one of the things about this building that was a design choice that we made was this fat corner is where NFIRAOS is going to stand. And I will define that. So NFIRAOS is the narrow field infrared adaptive optics system. And so it sits on this concrete slab at the back, and that slab is separated from all the rest of the concrete. And the idea there is that it will keep the vibrations of the rest of the building from causing problems with NFIRAOS. And so NFIRAOS is one of these things that's very sensitive to external vibration. And so there's a lot of things that actually happen within the telescope and within the instrument to minimize that vibration. And so when we're building this building, we don't want to have our own vibration that is messing up our measurements. So this was done towards the end of 2018. And as we all know, it does rain in Victoria. And so at one point, the edges here kind of filled up with water. But we got that all taken care of and moved on. And eventually we had a full slab of concrete and walls. And then the steel started to go up. And that was exciting to see the steel go up and the cranes with these big pieces of metal on them. And as soon as the steel was done, as soon as the last trusses in the roof were done, they started working on this exterior cladding. And that was visible for quite a while around Victoria. It was a great big bright green building. And then in 2020, the pandemic began and we all went home and the animals came out. But it turns out people kept working on the building. So the building was finished in October of 2020. There's an image of testing the crane. And we had a semi here that had brought a bunch of big, heavy concrete weights to test the load of the crane. And so you can see how big the front door is with that semi in there. And then the next picture is pretty much everything is done. We have our shiny epoxy floor. The crane is yellow overhead. We have some big fans in the ceiling, lots of power around the edges. And then, as I said, October 20th was our ribbon, October 22nd, I think, was our ribbon cutting ceremony when we took possession of the building. So that was quite the excitement because one, we got to actually go on site. It was the first time I had been on site since the pandemic started. So that was exciting in itself to see other people. But as you can see, we were all socially distancing. And so within the building, as I said, we have this big crane. This is a 15-ton crane that's used to lift all the parts of NFIRAOS. NFIRAOS itself weighs about 45 tons. So there's no way that we can lift it as a single piece, but we lift all the components. And our heaviest thing is right around 15 tons. And so that's what the crane is rated for. I mentioned our shiny floor, which is mostly just to keep everything clean. It's easily cleanable. When we have massive cooling systems for such a large building, and that's to maintain temperatures within the building. And every engineer needs lots of power and lots of internet. So we have that. I like these pictures because they kind of show the progression of the outside of the building. So there was the bright green for quite a while. And then this middle one shows all three colors. So there's the bright green, the orange is an insulation layer, and then there's the tiled outside. And then the bottom one shows the finished building. So this building itself is 29 meters long, and that's in this bottom picture direction. About 23 meters wide, which is in the middle one direction, and 20 meters high. And so I know Scott has gone over the 30-meter telescope, and it's as big as an ice rink. But when you really think about it, how big is the 30-meter telescope? So for a local landmark, the Empress, the telescope sitting in front of the Empress is taller than the top of the building. And if you added the dome in here, it would be about as wide as the Empress. And I feel like that gives you a good perspective of how big things are and how big these instruments are that sit on these platforms next to the mirror. And we call those Naismith platforms, which I'm sure is named after somebody, but it's a stationary platform, which is nice for an instrument because it doesn't change as the telescope moves. So this is another picture of the telescope. The teal color is the Naismith platform. And so that's stationary. The telescope will tilt over, but that platform stays horizontal. And then the telescope will rotate, and that platform does rotate as the telescope rotates. So this is NFIRAOS on the side, narrow field infrared adaptive optics system. It's big. It takes up half of that platform. And so if you look at it up close, the dimensions of it, 10 meters wide, or almost 7 meters across, almost 5 meters high, and it's 4.5 meters off the ground. And so the primary reason for being 4.5 meters off the ground is that we have an instrument, one of these client instruments that sits underneath NFIRAOS. And so that has to have enough room to get in and out. And it turns out that when we build this in Victoria, we're going to have that bottom instrument here, and we're going to integrate that as well. So Scott showed this picture as well. This is NFIRAOS in the building. It is quite large. The crane rails are here, and there's not much gap between the top of NFIRAOS and those crane rails. And this instrument underneath is called IRIS. And NRC is actually in Victoria is building this top kind of octagonal part of IRIS. The rest of it comes from our partners in the US and Japan. This is a little zoomed in view. So we're going to have actually labs all the way on the left side here on the whole length of the building. So we don't have a lot of room there for actual building of NFIRAOS. And so this area in the front is going to be the whole staging area for actually building this. And it's going to take up all the room that we have. The building is just going to be big enough. So these are a couple pictures of what's going to happen, how we're going to build NFIRAOS. This purple structure here is a telescope support simulator. It's called TESS. And it basically raises NFIRAOS up to that 4.5 meter level, the same as the telescope structure would. And we'll build this optical enclosure on top of it. This image on the bottom left is the optics structure. Scott showed a picture of this, and it is big enough to walk around in. And if you know me, I'm not very big, so you might think I can walk around in it, but it's not true. Anybody could. It's going to be a jungle gym. It's like the size of a children's playground. And then once that optical bench goes inside, we add the optics and we put the top on, and then we can start testing that system as is here. And once we have it tested by itself, we can start adding iris. And so this is a top view that shows all of our lab space on the left-hand side. NFIRAOS is basically done. And then we have a couple models of iris because there's a few integration steps for it. So it takes up quite a bit of floor space on its own. This red part here, which was also shown in the previous view, is a cart. It's what installs the instrument under NFIRAOS. So to get this instrument under here, we lift it up off the floor, we slide it in, and then we lift it up and bolt it to the bottom of NFIRAOS. So all those things are going to happen, and we're going to test NFIRAOS with iris, and then we will disassemble all of it and ship it to TMT. And that whole process will probably take a few years. We don't have a start date quite yet, but we're hoping to start it fairly soon. And then once NFIRAOS and iris are gone to TMT, this building will be available for other instruments. And with the way of the world, there's going to be more TMT instruments. The Europeans have a very large telescope that will need large instruments. So I have no doubt that we will continue building large instruments in this building. And that's it for me.
All right. Thanks so much, Jenny and Scott. Great talk. Now we'll open it up to questions. If anyone has a question in either YouTube or Zoom, please type that in to the chat. I have one or two questions myself. I'm curious for NFIRAOS. You mentioned it's big enough to clamber around in. How big is the deformable mirror in NFIRAOS? What's its diameter?
The deformable mirror is 300 millimeters, so that's a foot in diameter.
Wow. And how many actuators does it have on there? Like what's the resolution? I guess it wouldn't have to be quite as dense with infrared, but
so the actuator, they're 60 in diameter, so 60 by 60 on a round mirror.
Okay.
It's not exactly 60 squared, something less than that, but they are 5 millimeters apart. So wow. half a centimeter between actuators.
Wow. All right. Randy asks, how do you test the instrument without a telescope attached?
That's a good question. We have internal sources. So we have, we don't have a telescope simulator, but we have internal sources that are used for testing, but they're also used for science calibration. So when we have instruments, the instruments have helped us determine what requirements we need on sources. And so when an instrument wants to do flat fields or something like that, we have the sources that'll do that. So there's internal to NFIRAOS, there's sources, and then we have what we call a science calibration unit that has more scientific sources, but most of our testing is done with our internal sources. Okay.
To follow up on that, do you do simulation of like the optical effects of the telescope itself? Like, does the wavefront sensor account for like the diffraction coming from all those mirrors together? I imagine that point spread function on like how much the starlight is scattered just as a function of the telescope is pretty complex.
We do most of our calibrations without the telescope. Well, while we're in Victoria, we do everything without the telescope, and we'll go through as much as we possibly can. When we're actually at TMT, we'll do daytime calibrations with our internal and science calibrations. But then there's a few things that we actually do need the telescope for. And so there will be on-sky calibrations for those few things, but we try to do as much as possible without the telescope.
Okay. Let's see. Lori asks, don't you think it would be really cool to have those stripes on the front door of the building represent a simplified spectrum of a star?
Would be really very neat, for sure. It's a good idea. You mean on the door of the integration and test facility, right?
Sorry?
You mean on the door of the integration and test facility?
Yes,
Yeah.
but right now there's 2 orange stripes and a yellow stripe or something like that there. And the first time I looked at it, I said, oh my gosh, wouldn't that be so cool to have a spectrum represented by something that was kind of important for the facility? But I'm sure that those stripes are there for very specific reasons and, unique. But I just thought it was a really cool thing to think about.
It's a nice idea.
I'm sure you could find some infrared spectrum that it somewhat matches. Just call it that.
Oh, like it'll be just invisible, like you don't have to paint it.
Yeah, or just find some element with that rough spacing and just say that's what we meant. Let's see. Reg asks what the amplitude is for the active mirror displacement. So on that deformable mirror, how much is it actually getting pushed up and down?
I believe a requirement. So we don't actually use the whole stroke of the mirror, but the requirement, I believe, is 9 microns, I think. Does that sound right?
Yeah,
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, so it's in the optical world, 9 microns is actually a lot. So it's like 10 times the wavelength. So the atmosphere itself only takes up maybe 40% of that. And the rest of it is for internal compensations, and wind shake of the telescope is one. So the winds buffet the dome and that shakes the telescope, and we have to correct that as well.
Right. Sort of, and if I remember correctly, the secondary mirror on the TMT is it active as well? Is it a tip tilt, or no, it's fixed?
No, M2 is currently fixed.
Okay, so you have to do all that sort of correction with the deformable mirror.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah, M2 can move very slowly, but it doesn't move at the speed that we need for the AO system. It can set itself slowly, but the NFIRAOS has to do all the work for the fast corrections.
Right. Another one from Reg that follows up on and echoes a question I had. What's the surface of the mirror made of? Is it elastic, and what's the coating on it?
Most
is that a trade secret?
So most deformable mirrors are made out of a very thin sheet of glass. Our deformable mirrors are made out of a different special material, but they're coated in protected silver. So all of the optics in NFIRAOS are protected silver, and that's okay. For the wavelength range. So NFIRAOS has laser guide stars in it, and the laser guide stars are at 589 nanometers. So that's nice yellow sodium color. So like the sodium lamps, street lamps, and then the science is more in the near infrared. So we cover quite a large spectrum, more so than most instruments do. And silver is the best choice for getting the most reflectivity.
Yeah. For context, the Plaskett telescope mirror is coated in aluminum, although I believe it was originally coated in silver. Aluminum is great for optical, but not so good at infrared wavelengths. And finally, from I think we've got two more here. From Ben, we've got, do you know yet which instruments might be developed later for TMT or the European extremely large telescopes? Are there any plans in the works?
Well, so right now the first light instruments for TMT are seeing limited multi-object spectrograph called WFOS, and then the NFIRAOS adaptive optics system with IRIS. And there are several possibilities for the next generation of instruments for TMT. One of which is actually, I mentioned an instrument for Gemini that we're working on called GearMOS, which is a infrared spectrograph that is adaptive optics assisted, but it has 4 arms that move around with integral field units on them that can take spectra of objects with spatial information for the objects. And so there's an instrument called IRMOS for TMT that's under consideration that would be basically the next version of that for an ELT telescope. But there's also several instruments that are being considered for extrasolar planet research, some of which are small instruments, kind of suitcase-sized instruments that could be fed by NFIRAOS. And then some of them are much more ambitious. There's one called the PSI, Planets. I forget what the acronym stands for, but it's a very an independent coronagraph adaptive optics system that would be able to image extrasolar planets.
Wow.
Yeah.
Sounds like some cool stuff is in the work.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, and finally, from Randy, why are these big adaptive optics systems being put together in Victoria? Specifically, why not, say, in Hawaii, where they'd be closer to the site?
Well, so one of the challenges is that Mauna Kea is at 4,200 meters altitude, and so it's a challenging environment to work in, and also the telescope itself doesn't have the kind of laboratories and facilities that we have for developing the instrument. So it's really important that we build an instrument that and test it so that when we deliver it to the telescope, it has a very high likelihood of working and very little rework needed before it will actually be observing on sky. And that's one of the things we pride ourselves on, is delivering instruments that kind of work out of the box. So there's this, as Jenny pointed out, it'll be in our integration and test facility for several years, doing testing and making sure it's all working before we ship it to the telescope.
Fantastic. And very last question, once it's all put together and shipped to the telescope, will you be doing an unboxing video?
I think Jenny will be in charge of that. Yeah, I think there'll be, well, all joking aside, I think there will be lots of information coming about how it's going, and I'm sure we'll have some remote cameras so we can see the progress and so forth. So it should be very exciting.
Fantastic. I look forward to seeing it.
We want to do a time lapse for sure.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again so much, Jenny and Scott, for telling us about all that cool stuff going up on the hill and why that giant green thing is there. Look forward to seeing all the work that's going to come out of it in the future. And at some point, I need to get up to Penticton and visit the DRAO, because that CHIME telescope is just incredible.
Yeah, it's quite a spectacular sight. And if you're ever in the neighborhood, I highly recommend visiting.
Excellent. All right. And I think we'll move along to our next thing, which is, oh, I think it's me. So let me present here. Let's see. All right, so I'm going to be talking a bit about the annular eclipse that happened a little while back, and sharing some amazing photos that were snagged of it. So this is a lunar eclipse, which means that this was the moon going in between the Earth and the sun and casting a shadow on the Earth. In this case, though, the moon didn't quite cover up the sun entirely. And I'll go into that a bit more. But the shadow of the moon passed over Eastern Canada, and over Greenland and above Russia as well. Just sort of clipped the Earth at the very top of it. But there were several amazing shots taken. I love the ones that were taken right in the morning or the evening as the sun was rising or setting. Like this one, which I believe is taken near the Great Lakes or over the Great Lakes with what's called the devil horns. And this is something you only really get in a solar eclipse. And in this case, it just happened to line up perfectly that those bits of the sun that weren't shadowed were just poking up over the horizon straight up. So it looks like the devil is climbing up over the horizon, coming in a beautiful red color to complement that as well.
Aaron,
so
sorry, I wanted to,
yes.
I just wanted to interrupt because I was so interested. Do you know why it looks all squished like that with those devil horns?
Oh yeah. And I think I have something I was going to talk about that. Here, let me. So it looks squished like that because of refraction. Basically, as you're looking down towards the horizon, you're looking through more atmosphere. Because up above you, the atmosphere is fairly thin, but as you go towards the horizon, you're actually looking through a much thicker layer of atmosphere, and that actually bends the light quite a bit. This is also why the sun appears red. That thicker layer of atmosphere absorbs more of the blue light, but because of like gradients in temperature and atmospheric density, you actually get refraction coming just up over the horizon. So when the sun is actually, when the image of the sun is touching the horizon, actually the sun itself is below the horizon. You're actually just seeing the refracted light coming up over it. And it just happens to work out that it's like roughly that when it's at the horizon, it's under, exactly. So actually all of this light is in this picture is probably coming from below the horizon of whoever took it, and it's warped a bit by that refraction through the atmosphere. Yeah, so what makes an annular eclipse special? Why are we using this word? So in a normal eclipse, the moon completely covers up the sun. The moon is about 400 times smaller than the sun in diameter, but also 400 times closer. So when we see them in the sky together, they look pretty much exactly the same size. But the moon isn't always exactly the same distance from the Earth. Its orbit isn't a perfect circle, it's a bit of an ellipse. So every now and then we catch an eclipse when the moon is at the farthest part of its orbit. And in that case, it doesn't quite cover up the sun entirely. And if it passes directly in front of the sun, we're left with a ring of light, or an annulus, which is a fancy word for ring, around the moon's shadow. So these eclipses are a bit more rare, but they do happen, and they're going to happen more in the future, but more on that in a bit. So here's a great example of that ring of fire. So this was taken as the, I don't think I put in where this was taken, but this one was taken over the course of the eclipse, going from, I think, afternoon to evening. Yeah, so the sun gets redder as the eclipse progresses. So yeah, the ring of fire there in the middle, and then these beautiful crescents. And actually in the third image, I don't know how well it's coming through on your end, but if you look really close, you can actually see some breaks in that crescent. And this is where mountains or crater rims on the moon are actually breaking up the edge of the sun's light. So you're actually seeing the shadows of mountains there. Shameless self-promotion. This is my visit to the last total eclipse that, well, this one was in 2014. And I got the opportunity to go down to Tennessee and observe it myself. Fantastic experience. But you get the same sorts of crescents happening in a total eclipse. This picture on the right-hand side is the shadow from a tree. And as the light passes through the leaves, you get all sorts of like little pinholes that the light passes through. And in each case, it makes a pinhole camera image on the ground. So you get these very cool stripy shadows, and the shadows also look like more stark. There's less diffusion in them. Very, very surreal experience. This is some more from that 2014 eclipse. This one is a fantastic image of the sun right at the moment of the eclipse. It's a whole bunch of images with different exposures that are stacked together, so you can see detail at all sorts of different light levels. So we can see the corona of the sun, these sort of wings coming out to either side, or to the top and bottom. We can see the surface of the moon, and then some solar prominences coming up off the surface of the sun, those red little bridges up at the top. This other image here is an image of the moon's shadow, actually, on the Earth's surface. These eclipses don't shadow the entire Earth. They only create a small patch of shadow where you can see the total eclipse. Anywhere else, you get what's called a partial eclipse. And I'll just pop back here. So the shadow is called the umbra. So what you were seeing in the right image there was this patch of the moon's shadow. We don't get that in an annular eclipse because the sun's light is able to make it into the moon's shadow behind it. So these eclipses are fairly rare, and there's you may be wondering, why isn't there an eclipse every month? Because if the Earth, or if the moon goes between the Earth and the sun every month, then why wouldn't we see the moon cover the sun? This diagram is absolutely no help whatsoever. This is a XKCD comic that just throws in a whole bunch of crazy words in there. Basically, the moon's orbit is tilted with respect to the Earth's orbit. So the Earth goes around the sun, traces out a circle along this line here, but the moon, as it goes around, it sort of ducks above and below the sun from the Earth's point of view. So even though we'd be seeing a new moon as the moon is going between us and the sun, it's either just above or just below the sun on the sky, and so it doesn't actually cover it up. It's only when the moon is sort of at this midpoint of the orbit, called a node of its orbit with our orbit, that we actually get eclipses, either solar eclipses or lunar eclipses, where the moon goes behind the Earth and into the Earth's shadow. So we can only see these roughly every 6 months or so. Or we have the opportunity every 6 months or so. It depends on whether the moon is actually a full or new moon at that time. So to finish off, here's some more great pictures of the eclipse from this month, the 10th. This one, first one on the left, I believe, was taken in Connecticut. And the second was in Wyoming, just over this tall building here across the lake. Some more of those double horns. Now, did I include it? Yeah. So this, these double horns that we see during an eclipse, or this big crescent shape. See, do I have time? I've got a tiny bit of time. So you may see this same shape in like drawings of the moon or that sort of thing, but you never get this shape with just the moon, because the moon is always half shadowed, half lit. You never get the crescent arms coming past the middle of the moon. So if you ever see a moon that's like a big C like that in a picture, that's impossible. That doesn't happen. But the thing that really gets me, if people tend to do this shape of the moon, they also tend to do this, where they put stars in front of the moon, or filling in the dark part of the moon on their picture. That also can't happen because the moon is opaque.
Yeah, the moon is just like a C shape.
Yeah, so here's some examples of the types of crescents we get from the moon, and none of them ever go past sort of the north-south line. And I think I'll have to skip this part because I'm already a bit over. So thank you all, and if there are any questions, I'll pop over into the chat. How do I do that?
Hey, Aaron, I think we need to have a talk about things that we see in cartoons that never actually happen.
Oh, yeah.
My other favorite is telescopes peeking out of telescope domes.
Oh, yeah.
That doesn't
That's a recipe
happen
for wind
either.
fake.
Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm. All right.
Aaron, Randy gave a fabulous presentation a little bit ago at Astro Cafe about why some of the differences between the eclipses. I think, didn't you do that, Randy? Are you there? I can't remember whether he's still there. Yes. And you were talking a little bit about some of the differences with the eclipses as well, weren't you? Did you have anything more that you wanted to add to Aaron's thing here?
I'll get in touch with you, Aaron, but you presented it beautifully. I'm not going to thank you very much.
Right, we had some beautiful pictures. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All right. So it doesn't look like there are any questions in the chat for that. So I'm going to pass it along to Lori and Pat, who are going to tell us a bit about the solstice that's just passed.
All right. So I need to get Pat. We need to get Pat on here too, if we can.
Patricia wants to start her video, then I can add her in. But if she doesn't feel like putting video on, then I won't.
Well, I'd like her to do that if I could. Yeah. Okay, there she is. Okay, I'm going to. I would like to start my. Oops, just a minute. Hold on. Just a minute. I just want to go down. Go here. And just put this. Just get this up. There we go. All right, now I can go back and share my screen. Oh dear, I thought I had this all set up. Of course not, right?
Happens to the best of us.
Okay. All the time. All right, here we go. There we are. That's what I want. So I'm going to just start. Patricia and I we're going to do a little presentation on the summer solstice, and I know that it was kind of last week, and we were going to kind of do it last week, but that didn't work. So we thought, well, it's so hot today and tomorrow and yesterday and everything that this will just simply come in absolutely handy, because right now we're kind of absolutely, summer has certainly come to Victoria. So here we are. So the summer solstice solstice is from the Latin sol for sun and stitium for still or stopped. And we have had presentations about the winter solstice when we have been up at the center. And now we're doing it with the summer solstice. So same kind of thing. So it happened on June the 20th, so 6 days ago, on 2021. It switches between the 20th, the 21st, or the 22nd, depending on what happens. And actually, Randy did a fabulous little presentation as well on how the solstice changes over the time as well. But and the solstice comes because the Earth again is tilted, just like Aaron was showing, was that it's tilted at 23.4 degrees. And as it orbits around the sun, there's a point at which when the sun is kind of coming around, like over here in the June solstice, that it's tilted at its greatest degree towards the sun in the northern hemisphere, and that it can't go any further, and that's when the sun is at its highest point, and then goes back again. So we already are 6 days into having the sun start to kind of go back in the other way. And this year, the solstice was at 8:32 Pacific Daylight Time here in Victoria, back on June the 20th, and that is the start of astronomical start to summer. It's not the meteorological start to summer, because usually that is labeled as June the 1st, but for astronomical it is, even though in some cases, of course, summer weather can start well before that. And of course, conversely, when we are having our summer solstice, then the southern hemisphere is having their winter solstice. So the sun is directly overhead at the Tropic of Cancer at the summer solstice. So then again, because the Earth is tilted toward that, the sun is completely tilted so that it's at the Tropic of Cancer, and whereas by the time it's into the equinoxes, it's actually directly overhead on the equator. And then when it gets to the winter solstice for us, it would be overhead at the Tropic of Capricorn, and we would be really in the dark. So the sun has its maximum tilt at the North Pole, and to have 24 hours of daylight. And this is up in Norway. This is a picture from Norway, showing how the sun never sets. It never will set over that time. And so here in Victoria, we had these were the solstice numbers on that day. The 20th was 16 hours and 8 minutes of daylight. Sure, exactly. Does anybody know online what the set is for Victoria now? It was supposed to be 9:19 last week. Does anybody know what the number is today? Not sure. I'd have to look that one up. It might be as much as a few minutes less than that. But up in Tuktoyaktuk, there was no sunrise or sunset. The daylight is 24 hours, but the highest point came at 2:56 p.m. in the afternoon. So I'm going to so just a little bit of that, but now we're going to talk a little bit more about how the summer solstice we've been celebrating the summer solstice for an extremely long time. It's been known, of course, for thousands of years. And I'm going to turn it over to Patricia to do a little bit of some cultural stuff with us. Go ahead, Patricia.
Okay, hello. So this day, of course, marks the beginning of summer, the silly season all over the world. It's been celebrated for millennia. Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes?
Yeah, he's coming in great.
Okay, good.
Yes?
Yeah, okay. So it's been a time for ancient peoples to plan their planting season or start hunting and gathering in order to eventually be prepared for the winter. Many societies created gods to worship, the life-giving effects to the sun, which makes life possible, of course. Wishing for a wonderful harvest has been a universal theme and is still relevant. So Stonehenge is one of the most recognizable monuments in the world. It was built 5,000 years ago, and it was built to show the sunset of the winter solstice and the sunrise of the summer solstice. So every year, many people descend on Stonehenge to see the sun rise. And some of them have to hop over fences to do this because apparently there has been sabotage of the stones over the years. So Druids, Wiccans, pagans, and the curious all celebrate the longest day of the year. It's considered to be sacred and a healing place because there are very few burials. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. Right, now the next place is quite interesting because it's Mesolithic, which means it's 5,500 years old. And this is in Malta. And it's a temple complex built on the edge of the cliff, which has 3 temples that are conjoined. And the lower temple is used for astronomical observations. With the light from the solstices, it illuminates the left and right stones of the doorway and lights up the main axis. So archaeologists believe that from the flint knives and holes they found, that it was also a place for animal sacrifice. Other found artifacts suggest that it was a place of healing and to promote fertility. And drilled holes also correspond to the phases of the moon. So it's been linked to the goddess movement, where the moon was female and the sun was male. Female statues were worshipped, and the earth itself was considered to be a living goddess named Gaia. So this was when women
Patricia. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Patricia, I was just going to say that this, I just find this this fascinating because in one spot how it's made, there's the midsummer solstice line, there's the midwinter solstice line, and then the sunrise, then the equinox is in the middle right here, and so it's being made so that it completely is part of all of that. Yeah. Okay.
All right. Now we have Egypt, where Giza, the pyramids there are aligned with the sun, and the Sphinx, I believe, faces due east. But then there's also the complex at Karnak that's astronomically aligned with the sun. There was an ancient practice of fasting from sunrise to sunset during the solstice. And then after the sunset, then they would have feasting, singing hymns, and saying prayers. This is a Neolithic temple, and it's the largest ever constructed, and it's also designated as a UNESCO site, where the god Amun-Ra lived with his wife Mut and their son Khonsu. And there's a myth that Mut was really upset because there were some people trying to kill the sun god Ra. So she started killing people, and then the river Nile ran red with their blood. So she was tricked by her husband to drink the blood, and what he did was mix beer and pomegranate juice. So she got really, really drunk, and she stopped killing people and became an aspect of a much gentler job, Hathor. But this is quite a spectacular site. And Giza is also at the pyramids. The sun goes between the 2 pyramids, and it's quite fantastic. Now, this is a really interesting solar observatory in Peru, which it's the earliest observatory in the Americas. It's 2,300 years old, making it a Neolithic site. There is a prominent feature of 13 towers that you can see on the left. And from the leftmost side in the winter, it starts and it eventually goes all the way to the end. And that's when it's the summer solstice. So it takes 6 months to move along that line. And then there's also a temple where it was actually fortified because Obviously, they had some concerns about security, and this is where it was a ceremonial site. And this is probably one of the first direct places where there's sun worshipping, and it predated the sun worshipping with the Incas. And it's been,
Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, it's been abandoned for 2,000 years, but they want to make it into a UNESCO site because of the ingenuity of the construction. All right, here's the Chaco Canyon. And if you look at the slide on the left, you can see the jagged sun dagger. And that's between two monolithic stones that allow the sun to come through there. And this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site known as the Chaco Cultural Natural History Park. It's considered to be an Anasazi homeland. It was occupied from 900 to 1250 AD. It has a river surrounded by 3 mountains in a semi-arid climate. It had a 700-mile road built directly to it, straight. There's absolutely no curves. And they think it was a ceremonial road because at the time, there were no wheels and there were no mules or horses or oxen or anything to take any kind of transportation. And it's semi-arid. Now, there was a river, so I assume that they were able to use boats. But they floated or brought logs from 200 miles away. They built these incredible multi-level story homes that had 800 rooms, and then they plastered it with mud. So these were occupied until about 1200 AD. And there's also a pictograph of a star that was found depicting a supernova that occurred in 1054, and one of the crescent moon, which appeared close to the sky to the supernova. And there's observatories built in here. They tracked the progress of the sun. They had wells, and they captured rainwater in barrels. These people are the ancestors of the Hopi, Zuni, Navajo, perhaps Apache, other Pueblo peoples, and there were 200 communities here. So it was a huge valley, and the whole thing is not inhabited anymore.
You can see in the right-hand pictures at the top that there's a sun, a light from the sun kind of above the third window. And then in the bottom one, the light has now moved down and is over the second window. And that is that's the moment that is the moment of the summer solstice, of the sun coming up, and where that is, and that's at the Chaco Canyon. So you see people are watching for that specific moment.
Right, all over Northern Europe now, and actually from medieval times, they celebrated the solstice with feasting and possibly weddings or fake weddings or finding a mate. It was about fertility and planting and jubilation, eating the first strawberries of the season. So it was a time of great joy. And they in Sweden, they still do it, and they dance around the maypole and they do a frog dance. And there's also a tradition of swimming naked in the ocean at midnight. So so in the northern parts of Europe, they have the sun for a very, very long time. And both in Denmark and Norway, they have huge bonfires to cast away evil spirits, but they also use bonfires for couples to jump over to see how high the crops would grow. And so they usually make this into a long weekend. And Fairbanks, Alaska is 140 miles south of the Arctic Circle. And one of their claims to fame is their midnight baseball game. So it starts at 10 o'clock at night and goes to midnight. And they have a 12-hour festival with music and food and crafts and all kinds of things. So it's a time of great joy. I also think that this is a time when they also probably experience the midnight sun. I know in the Arctic they have a dark season and a light season. The light season usually goes from April to August, where the sun never sets. And in Inuvik, there's also an Arctic market where they sell these beautiful beaded crafts and so on. And they also have lots of different ways of celebrating the season. And this is quite unique. Our neighbors in Seattle have the Naked Bicycle Parade, but they do cover their nakedness with paint. So it's quite unique, and it's a festival. They have lots of music and markets and food and drink, and it's a big party. And lastly, I think this is Canada's Summer Solstice Indigenous Festival. And this is a time for powwows, singing, dancing, drumming, feasting. It's also a time of great joy.
All right. So we'll just stop the share here. And if anybody's got any questions, I don't know whether we can do that, but just again, it's just seems as though it's just such a celebration of light and of warmth, especially tonight. And then we'll just stop it there. Thanks very much, everybody.
All right, thanks, Lori and Pat. Yeah, if there are any questions, again, please feel free to toss them into the chat or the Zoom or the YouTube comments. And next up, we've got, let's see, I think Ask an Astronomer. Amy's going to be asking questions to, I believe we have Ruhi and, was it Ben today, I think? Yes, Ruhi and Ben. Hello. Are you two melting as much as I am?
Yeah.
First question.
I'm on fire.
Yeah, yeah.
It's kind of cool
All
up here.
Well, thanks. Oh yeah, Ben's up at the center where there's great AC.
Oh, lucky.
Yeah. All right, I'll pass it over to you two and go melt into a puddle in the corner.
I'm just hanging out in this gravitational lens.
So, hi, I'm Amy, and I just want to introduce our astronomers for tonight. So, Ruhi is an avid astronomer lover, as she is finishing her final year at the University of Victoria, doing her combined degree in physics and astronomy. She's done research looking into deeply embedded protostellar outflow shapes with Dr. Doug Johnson, as well as looking for exoplanets around white dwarfs with Dr. Karun. Her interests are in stellar and planet evolution. She also runs the Physics and Astronomy Course Union at UVic. And we also have Ben. Ben grew up in London, England, and graduated from Trinity College, Cambridge, with a certificate of advanced study in mathematics. He received a master's from Queen's University in Ontario and a PhD from the University of Victoria, specializing in the structure and evolution of low-mass stars in late phases of evolution, and was awarded the Gold Medal of the Governor-General of Canada. He worked at the University of Maryland, the University of Virginia, and NASA Space Flight Center on the Hubble and UIT-based stellar photometry, is that how you pronounce that word?
Yes.
And the ultraviolet spectral evolution of galaxies. In 1998, he switched careers and became a lead programmer at NASA Goddard, working on software for the interpretation of data from X-ray and gamma ray sources, as well as creating an object-oriented library for manipulating astronomical images and data, both of which are still in wide use today. After a short stint in the financial industry, he returned to Victoria and was hired to work on integration and later cloud architecture at a Silicon Valley-based software company. Ben's older son was diagnosed with autism in 1995, which has led him into a bit of a life, actually, I think, into public advocacy and nonprofit leadership. He is the founding chair for the Friends of the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory, which we incorporated in June of 2015. So welcome to both of you. As we go through this section, if anyone has any questions on either YouTube or in Zoom, if you just put them into the chat window, then we'll pick them up. But we have had a couple questions come through social media to get us started. So I will do my I will do my best to interpret these. But so one of the questions is that someone had recently seen a story about the rotating cosmic filaments. Supposedly these are the largest rotating structures in the universe. However, the structure of the universe seems to include a network of these filaments, and I don't understand how they can rotate individually if they are part of a larger network. Any explanation for this?
It's a great question. I haven't really heard much about cosmic filaments. All of my research is very stellar and solar system oriented. So Ben, do you have any insight?
So what I know about this is that the structure, the large scale structure of the universe is derived from small variations in the cosmic background energy that happened very close to the Big Bang. If we look back into the cosmic microwave background, you all have probably heard that in 1967, Penzias and Wilson discovered this radio background, which was the same everywhere at 2.7 degrees Kelvin, 2.7 degrees above absolute zero, and it seemed to be everywhere, in every direction the same. And to a very high degree, our latest satellites have borne that out. The match against a straight black body radiation is incredibly sharp. In fact, the deviations at a level of 1 part in 10,000. And if you look at there's been a series of satellites, first COBE, the Cosmic Background Explorer, and then WMAP, I forget what the W stands for, Microwave Anisotropy Probe, and then the Planck satellite. Each of these has borne out the fact that the universe has this background radiation field, which is the same everywhere. And each one has made that more refined and seen more detail in this. Now, what's the relevance of all this to the cosmic filaments? Well, the cosmic filaments represent the slight variations in the background, which, you know, when you project it forward, represent the places where matter eventually coalesce to form galaxies and superclusters, and then clusters, and then galaxies. And the amazing thing about the universe's background is the fact that it has that structure. It's not randomly, the galaxies aren't randomly scattered all over the universe. They are arranged in these filaments of activity. And each of them has some set of motion that's based on its primordial state. The details the details of how this actually works, no one really knows yet. This is why we keep putting bigger telescopes into space and on the ground, because all of that fire, all of that large-scale structure is best observed when you look in the early universe, and we look at the early universe heavily redshifted, so in the infrared. So the James Webb Space Telescope, which is going to observe primarily in the infrared, is the perfect instrument, being large as well, that the largest instrument to observe this kind of things. And the individual motions of the filaments are really dependent on those unknown factors about the early universe. That's about, I think, all I can say about that.
Also, I think Aaron also knows a little thing about cosmic filaments.
Yeah, so these are, so you can think of it sort of like the, if you ever like use bubble bath and you look at the foam really close, there's sort of places where the bubbles meet that have these sort of strips of water in between the bubbles. And they form sort of this mesh or this foam, but it's the boundaries of the foam, the boundaries of the bubbles. This is sort of analogous to the cosmic web, the cosmic filaments. There are these voids in space that became more empty and empty and empty as the universe expanded. And anything that had a little bit of extra gravity pulled in the stuff around it. But in between two like big clumps of matter, you'd get stuff that got pulled in and didn't quite go directly to that clump, but went sort of to a middle point in between and collapsed into a filament between these two bigger clumps. And all the stuff in that filament is slowly falling towards one clump or the other. But in the meantime, it's all orbiting around a common sort of line of mass along that filament. So the entire filament can be rotating. All the galaxies in it can be orbiting around this common center of common line of mass, even though the filament itself isn't moving, so to speak. And I have a video that may help illustrate this. This is a favorite of mine. Let me share screen first. It doesn't help if you can't see it. All right, can you all see the video there? This is a charged knitting needle on the ISS with some charged water droplets orbiting around it. And so the water droplets see the needle as sort of a line of charge, analogous to the center of one of these filaments. And so they orbit around it sort of in a corkscrew fashion rather than in a circle. All right, I think that's all I had to say on that one. Back to you.
Thank you. So next question is directed towards Ruhi, which is, can you tell us a little bit more about the research that you were doing with Karun?
Yeah, for sure. So Karun and I started a project called SWEEP. So we are looking for exoplanets that are in the habitable zone around white dwarf stars. We don't know much about what happens to planets or like planets that are farther out as the stars explode. So for example, in our solar system, when our star finally decides to die, the inner planets probably won't make it, but the outer planets might. And we want to know what actually happens to planets that then become or then are situated in the habitable zone around the white dwarf stars. So what we did is we actually used the Newtonian imager up at the DAO, and we used something called the transit method. So as an exoplanet actually transits in front of its star or goes in front of its star, the actual percentage of the light that's coming from the star will dip. So when you're actually looking at a graph, it does like a little, it goes like that. It just dips down. And so then you know that there's an actual exoplanet around that star. So right now it's all about building almost an archive about planets around white dwarfs that are in this zone. That's what we're working on.
Nice. So Calvin might ask this one a little bit better, but so protostars are flowing outward, or are there atmospheres? Did I capture that, Calvin? He disappeared. I can, does that make sense? Nope. Okay, next question. What is the density of material in a protostar before it ignites?
Oh yeah, so protostars are actually low temperature stars, but high density. So you have everything. So when a protostar actually forms, you have these large molecular clouds, and they all start to fall into these little cores in these clouds. And that's where your protostar starts to begin. So everything is falling in, getting mushed together. So you're going to have a really volatile, high density environment, but low temperature, because fusion hasn't started in the core of the star. So there's low temperature, high density.
So what's high? That's me. It's my question. Sorry. Can you give me a number, like 10,000 psi, or?
I do not have a number off the top of my head.
We should get back to you on that, but just as a fun fact about this, when the sun and stars are fully working, they're fusing helium. They're fusing hydrogen to helium. The protostars are actually start off by burning up the deuterium and the lighter elements, so that they and those reactions take place at lower temperatures and pressures than the hydrogen to helium reactions. So it's kind of like a delicate balance between the incoming, everything is contracting under its own weight. At some point it forms enough. There's enough heat and density to start burning the deuterium. That tends to heat things up a bit, but eventually it needs to heat it up enough for the hydrogen to helium reactions to form. So I forget the exact. It's less dense than the sun center is, but to give you a number, we'd have to probably go look someone's calculations up.
All right,
thanks.
Thank you. I'm going to have a question from someone who has visited CHIME not that long ago. And the question is, why does CHIME have the 4 parallel half pipe arrangement rather than a couple of crossed arms like Utmost? Which is dishes look randomly located in SKA, photos and presentation. Is there a pattern, or is random better?
So I know for radio telescopes, they actually have, it's not really random. They do have set patterns for these dishes to be set up to get a specific overlap that they want. If I work with a lot of ALMA data, and I work with a lot of mosaic data. So what they do is when you're looking at the actual positions of the radio telescopes, there's a specific overlapping that you want to get as much data as you can. But Ben, if you'd like to speak more to that.
No, it's something to do with you're doing interferometry amongst multiple sources. So you're trying to essentially, you don't have a surface that's a square kilometer across. You have a set of dishes all of which collect data, and the incoming radiation forms a pattern. So you want to put the dishes in a way that's going to give you the highest resolution of the signal. Again, that's a detailed, the detailed configurations require knowledge of those patterns. Aaron tells us that CHIME is arranged north-south, so the beam sweeps across the whole sky, and doing it a different way would basically give you more complicated data to analyze. and you wouldn't get any more out of it. So it's so that they're arranged in north-south pattern, so that, you know, as the Earth rotates, it sweeps across the sky and picks up the signal in a kind of uniform way. Eventually, all this gets crunched on in big computers that take the individual, you know, output from each antenna, and they have to be analyzed that way. So you're trying to come up with a configuration that supports the analysis.
Okay.
So could I just ask Ben, so if there were 10 of these rather than 4, would we get like 2.5 more times data?
Yeah,
Yeah.
basically.
So I guess that's what they could afford to put on and what was kind of efficient for their use at that time.
Yeah, I imagine with radio telescopes, it's somewhat easier to make bigger instruments than it is for optical ones, which tend to build huge structures to make them happen. And you know that TMT, for example, has 492 little mirrors, right? In the tessellation pattern, and that's kind of hard to make. You know, there's a lot of engineering to get those all coordinated. With radio instruments, it's somewhat easier. Erin tells us there are 1,024 individual antennas in CHIME. So yeah, I guess if you had double the number, you'd pick up twice as much energy from the sky, and that would be easier to pick up the fainter objects. So yes.
Thanks. Yeah.
So you've got two things going on. One of them is the size of the detector, and the other is the number of antenna. Both affect the resolution and the ability to pick up the signal. So there is separate variables.
Thank you. I know that we're at time, but Calvin, I butchered your question and you're back now. I thought maybe, do you want to clarify your question about the protostars?
Oh, I was just following up with Lori's question about what Ruhi does about protostars. And I think you answered it already.
Okay, well, thank you both. There is a comment as well, Ruhi, I'll pass on, that the picture that is on social media of you with you and the puppy, that there's, you know, the dog looks lovely.
That's awesome.
And we'll get that answer to the question about CHIME and share it probably on social media with people. So thank you both for joining us, and we'll have this segment again on July 10th. So thank you.
Hey, thank you, Amy, Ruhi, and Ben. Some great questions there. Let's see, I think next we have David to tell us what's in the sky and lead us into electronically assisted astronomy. Are you there, David?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm barely here. It's extremely hot in the living room right now. So
yeah, I'm amazed my chair hasn't melted.
All right. So I won't take too long with this what's up in the night sky. I think a common thing that people ask about is where the planets are. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the moon. Now, we have a whole episode on the moon coming up in EAA. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about thin crescents and then a conjunction that's coming up. So the evening planets are Venus and Mars, so we can actually still see these. If you go, in fact, here's a challenge for you. If you go out when the sun sets, Venus and Mars are following very, very close afterwards. See how long it takes you before you can see Venus, because the sky is still pretty bright. So that's a challenge for you. In the morning, if you're brave enough to get up really, really early, you'll see Jupiter and Saturn. So here's a picture of Jupiter and Saturn that I took on the 22nd at 3:55 a.m. So just before dawn, you can actually see these hovering over the horizon line about 23 degrees, I guess, in the south and southeast. So the moon, we're actually just leaving full moon right now. So if you look at the phases here, we're actually moving in this direction. So the thing I want you to pay attention to is these 2 points here, the waning crescent and the waxing crescent, because as we move towards new moon, we'll get these thin crescents. Now, here's another challenge for you. It's actually not really that easy to do the waning crescent. Now, let me just go to the next thing here. Oops. Things aren't behaving the way they're supposed to. This is normal, I guess. Anyways, if we catch this, I can't seem to stop it here inside of the PowerPoint, but if we watch this really closely, we'll see it moving into the waning, which is here, this point here. And then it flips over to this side here, on this side. Let's see, there we go, we're able to stop it now. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend trying to view the thin crescent on this side. It's actually very close to the sun, and I wouldn't recommend it. If you're really careful, you can do it, but I'm not telling you to do it. The much easier one is the waxing crescent. So on July 10th, if you look very soon after sunset, if you look in the west-northwest direction at the horizon line, you should be able to see this, or you can attempt to see this. Traditionally, crescents are very difficult to see. The thinnest crescents are difficult to see. If you wait until maybe a day after when the crescents appear, they're much easier to see. So for instance, here's a picture of a waxing crescent that I took quite a time ago, and you can actually even make out the earth shine as well. So it's a nice thing to try to look for. So the very last thing I'm going to tell you about is the Venus and Mars encounter. So coming up on July 12th, we can actually see the two planets here approaching each other as we approach July 12th. So what I recommend people do is on any clear night, try to go out and see them, so you can actually see the approach and the passage of time. And something also special on the 12th is you'll see a thin crescent on that same night. You'll see the moon here on the side here. And when Venus and Mars get really close together, they'll be about ½ a degree apart. So if there's no questions, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about tonight. I'm sad to say that Mike Nash, who's the photographer that whose work we're going to see tonight during the EEA session, isn't able to be with us. He was able to be here earlier with us, but I was fortunate enough to maybe interview him for about, well, actually it was close to a couple of hours with Randy and Ruhi. So we did capture a few moments, and I'm hoping to maybe grab a few clips that I can show you. But his primary technique is something called lucky imaging. I'm gonna throw this link to the Sky and Telescope article into the chat. And basically what happens is any image that we take of the moon, and I don't know how many of you have tried to do this yourself, are always a little bit on the soft side. And that's because the intervening atmosphere blurs really fine detail. You can sort of make it out in this web page animation here. It's kind of bubbly, and using this technique called lucky imaging, you can get much higher resolution results. And I'll have to say, Mike's work is absolutely amazing. I had no hesitation in asking to use his work tonight. And Randy is, needless to say, a fanatic about the moon. So I think he's probably the best person to have here along with us to sort of talk to us. And Ruhi, as I understand, Ruhi's done a little bit of research, a little bit out of her realm, but she's going to tell us a little bit about maybe the origins of the moon and maybe some theories about it. So actually, I'd like to start there, Ruhi. Would you like to maybe share your screen?
Yeah, for sure. Okay. All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, beautiful.
Yes.
All right, so let's get into our moon. My little pin cap. Okay, so I think the first thing to really cover here is what is it? So our moon is the Earth's main satellite. And moving from inside out, if we talk about the composition and its layers, so the moon has a core that is made out of iron-rich rock. And then as we move outwards, the next layer is a non-rigid mantle, which is hot enough for the actual mantle to flow, and it transfers seismic waves. And then above that, we have a lithospheric mantle, which is a rocky layer, but is not hot enough for anything to actually flow. And then, of course, the part that we can actually see the moon with our eyes is the crust. And this is where you'll find all the craters and the fun things that we'll also look at tonight. So the moon, the importance of the moon, at least for us on Earth, is that the moon is tightly locked with us on Earth. So that's why we can only see the same side. But the moon also controls the tides here on Earth. It moderates the wobble or the precession of the Earth on its axis, and it creates a rhythm for life on Earth. So it helps with nocturnal animals to help with their lives. So the next thing we want to talk about are there are many theories on how the moon actually formed, but these are the three kind of main ones. The first one I want to talk about is capture. So it's the most simplest, like the moon was actually captured as it was flying by the Earth. And the Earth said, I don't want to let you get away. So it captured it and kept it in its rotation. The second one is fission. So as the Earth was forming, the moon formed from the same material as the Earth. It split apart as the Earth kept spinning and spinning and spinning. It actually split apart and created the moon. But the most accepted theory is the giant impact theory. So the thought is that proto-Earth was hit by a Mars-sized protoplanet that then knocked the material off of Earth's molten surface. And this molten material then came together through gravity and formed into the moon. And I'm sure Randy will also go into this later as well. Another important thing to talk about are, again, the phases of the moon. And the most important thing I want to talk about is actually the terminator. Can you guys see my mouse? So it's actually the shadow that you'll be able to see on the moon. This will actually give us the phases. And there are a lot of interesting photos when you take a picture of the moon against its terminator. It really highlights some interesting features. Oh yeah, I forgot, there's a clip here that actually shows you some of the phases. All right, the next are the craters. So these are what you're actually going to see most of on the moon. There are three main types of craters. They're simple, complex, and basin craters. So as you can see on the image here, this is, where's my mouse go? Oh, it's gone. Okay, that's fine. Simple craters are bowl-shaped with rounded or flat floors, and they have smooth ridges along the edge. And so these are the most common. You'll see a lot of these on the moon as well, especially on the side that doesn't face us. And then complex craters have scalloped walls with a central peak in the middle. So when you're looking at them, you'll see the actual crater on the outside, and then what looks like a tiny little mound of dust, rock, dirt in the middle. So the size of the central peak is dependent on the gravitational strength of the body. So peaks on Earth, the craters of the peaks on Earth will be smaller than those on the moon. And impact basins, the third type of craters, are defined when the crater is actually greater than 300 kilometers. And impact basins can either be simple or complex. So here I have a couple examples of what simple, complex, and impact basin craters are. So if you look at Tycho, you can definitely see the more prominent peak in the middle, while Moltke is like very smooth. There's no peak in the middle, it looks simple. And Mare Orientale is very large, but you can also see that there are ridges in the middle, possible peaks. They're very complicated. So we wanted to also talk about prominent features on the moon. So we have three types. We have mare, ridges, and rills. So mare are what are actually on the side mostly that is facing us, and we call them seas sometimes. They actually form from ancient volcanic eruptions that have mostly filled low-lying impact basins and then cooled, leaving behind basalt rock. I can never say that word right. And then ridges are found on mare as the lava actually contracts and cools, and it leaves behind these really cool ridges that can then stretch for several hundred kilometers. And then rills is the third type. So there's three types of sinus, accurate, and straight rills. And they're long, narrow depressions on the surface of the moon, and they can be found around cooled mare and extinct lava flows. So the last thing I kind of want to cover real quick is how do craters on a rocky surface differ to those on an ice surface? So I'm going to stop sharing real quick and then reshare. Okay, perfect. So I've got two models here. One is of our moon and the other is of Ganymede. So if we look at, let me zoom in a little bit, make it easier. All right, perfect. So I'm gonna look at craters that form on Ganymede, and you can see that Ganymede actually has a really thick shell of ice instead of compared to the moon, which is just like a rocky crust. So as you can see how the craters form differently, I can zoom in a couple. We have more circular craters on the moon as an asteroid would hit it, while on ice, you can actually see it kind of splinter outwards, which make these really interesting looking craters. You'll also see a lot of either impact basins and complex craters. Oh no, it's going too far. Oh, I've lost it. Oh no. See if I can get it back. I can't control the model. It's getting away from me. Oh well, I'll show it from here. We can see a lot more complicated ones here as well, while the moon has also a lot of simple craters that don't have these little peaks in the middle. It's a little thing on the moon.
So Ruhi, when we look at other planets' moons, we potentially could make some inferences about them as well, right? By looking at the crater types.
Yeah, for sure. We can, especially learning about our own moon will tell us a lot about our own solar system and exoplanets and their moons as well. So studying the moon is a treasure trove of knowledge for sure.
Great, great. Thanks, Ruhi. So stand by. I'm going to probably pass it over to Randy now. So as I mentioned, the three of us had a really nice session with Mike earlier in the week, and we had a really, really nice chat. And like I said, I really wish Mike had been here because it was a very good conversation, a dialogue that we actually had, and I certainly learned a lot. So hopefully, Randy, maybe we'll capture a little bit of that, and maybe we'll save a little bit of time at the end. I've got a few video clips of Mike interacting with us.
Well, I think the video clips were fantastic, so you should probably do those. But can you talk a bit about what makes a good lunar photograph?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I popped a reference to the Sky and Telescope site, but basically the challenge, as I mentioned, is atmosphere, and the atmosphere is shifting very, very, very rapidly. So yeah, you can get a decent picture of the moon, but it will always be a little bit soft. So what is so amazing about Mike's pictures is that he's using a technique called lucky imaging, and he's often using cameras of different sorts. Now, this is a 290 mm made by ASI, and this is my camera. I use the same camera actually, but as you can see, the sensors are really not that big. Okay, and the idea is that these, using a USB 3 interface, can operate at very, very rapid frames per second. So what that means is, as the atmosphere shifts, we can capture many of these images very quickly. And we always know that a certain percentage of them are going to be really sharp. So then we enable the services of a computer, which uses certain criteria. By looking at every frame, it would choose only the really sharp ones and then integrate them. And of course, there's further computer processing, image processing that's done to sort of sharpen edges, and there's different algorithms, what they call wavelet algorithms, that actually sort of refine the sharpness of the image. So that's basically the technique that Mike is using. He uses a larger video camera as well, but his frame rate will not be as high as the one on here. We basically rely on the fact that when we use a smaller region of interest, we can use faster frame rates. As the sensor gets bigger, it's a lot harder to get that kind of detail down the pipe, so to speak.
It really surprised me when I found out that the photographs they used of the moon for Apollo, in the 60s to decide where to go are not nearly as good as what amateurs are doing now.
Yeah, just as an insight, prior to these types of cameras being made available, people were actually hacking webcams. Probably like about 10 years ago, people would take webcams and basically reprogram them so that they could capture these frames individually and do exactly the same as what we're doing here. It's just that today we can buy commercial products and get much higher frame rates.
So Mike took a series of pictures on the 15th and 16th. So just 17th was the quarter moon. So it was, while it was still a crescent. And part of the fun of what we did was look at what a camera sees and what the eye sees when you sketch. And so I thought it'd be fun to compare sketches that I've made with similar illumination to what he got on the 15th and 16th. So I'm going to share the screen.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Randy. I think one of the nice things about this program, even though this is kind of like officially electronically assisted astronomy, I always wanted to keep it a comparative study as well, to see what we would see with our own eyes and what we are able to capture with our own brains. So we have amazing wetware in our brain that will take our input, like from our eyes, and do maybe something very similar to what this electronic technique allows us. Maybe not quite so perfect, but it's not bad either. And that's something you're going to talk about tonight, I think.
Well, let's see where it goes, David.
All right.
So what we have here is a picture from the north point of the moon, and I've rotated Mike's picture around because I have a Newtonian telescope which reflects, I see all the images upside down. And so north is at the bottom here. And again, I like to compare and contrast. There are some things that the eye just does really well. We're able to, with our eye, to see a much wider dynamic range. We can see the levels of gray from black to white in a way that a camera has a great difficulty to do. On the other hand, the spatial resolution, especially with these techniques that Mike is mastering, and a thing about Mike, which I just love, is he feels like he is a student of it. Like he's doing the best pictures you can imagine, and he's keep thinking, what can he do to make it better? So here we are in the north. There's some very clear things. So we have Aristoteles and Eudoxus here. And what I really like in the photograph is you can see real details in these rims where I can't with my 6-inch telescope. They really, I can see a lit rim and the shadowed limb of the crater, but to actually see this sort of detail is difficult. What you do see though is, you see how Aristoteles is a flat-bottomed crater, whereas Eudoxus is more of a bowl, and I caught that. You know, it's interesting looking at this afterwards. What I saw it as, it was a much larger shadowed half to this crater. I think I'm going to go on to the next one because my target this particular evening was to see what Mike caught beautifully here is this Rima Ariadnes. The Rima, or Rima is the plural, are these canyons. They're maybe about 3 kilometers across. And what I have found is that my best resolution is maybe about 6 kilometers. And so what I tried several times. This was a set of targets that the Royal Astronomical Society of Canada sets. It's called the Isabel Williamson Lunar Observing Program. And seeing this Rima here was one of the targets. And as you see in my my note here, very elusive. I got glimpses of it maybe 1% of the time. This was my second attempt. And I also tried on another time. There are a few features I'm really irritated that I haven't been able to see yet, like the craterlets and Plato. But I drew this in because it was just a fleeting image. But look at that beautiful detail and the offsets on it. It's just fantastic. Another thing that I'm just starting to understand. You see, there's this general trend here, and that's called Imbrium sculpting. And it's because when the Imbrium C, which is in shadow here to the right, or that would be on the, let me get that right, on the west side of the moon. It was a late collision, late meaning it was 3.5 billion years ago instead of 3.8 billion years ago, something like that. So by Earth geology, it is like crazy old. There's very little left of the Earth back then, but this is what you have on the moon. But it was such a violent set of ejecta coming off that it looks almost like it's wind swept, and that's called Imbrium sculpting. It's a term I just learned this week. This kind of D-shaped crater, Julius Caesar, is deformed because it was formed before the Imbrium C, and then it got deformed by it. Now, in the south part of the moon, I highly, highly recommend everybody take a telescope out and look at the moon. And one of the first things that you'll see is you've got these great big dark splotches, which are called mare or seas. But in the south, it's called the highlands. And it's very light colored, it's whitish, and it's complicated. And no sketcher actually just goes in one evening and tries to do the whole south. This was one of my more complicated sketches. It does feature, here is the Mare Nectaris, the Sea of Nectar, and I just love this rim around it. It's called the Altai Scarp, or the Rima, or the Rupus Altai. And it's about 3 kilometers high, that cliff. Just blows me away how, you know, the topography of the moon is just amazing.
So Randy, when the way you're describing this, it almost sounds like in your mind's eye, you're translating this into like real world sizes in your brain. You're thinking, oh, that's really tall, or that's at the size of a whatever, right?
Well, first of all, just the thought that you're looking at something that's 400,000 kilometers away and you're seeing these pretty tiny things. Lots of people ask if you can ever see the moon landing sites. And I have to say, even Mike Nash will not be able to get the landing site.
So I guess it's pointless trying to find the Hasselblad cameras there too.
Yeah. I think his resolution, he's probably going to get down to 1 kilometer, and that's not going to be good enough. And I have read that there is no optics that will be able to see that. That would be a good thing. What is theoretically, if you had all the budget in the world, and the answer is we can see it, but it's by sending spaceships up there. So the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter absolutely can see the you can actually see where the those little carts drove the astronauts on the during their extravehicular activities, but no, not from Earth. And yeah, part of the fun, I mean, I'm a geologist. There, I'm even wearing my Geological Survey of Canada shirt today. And the moon is a piece of the Earth, as Ruhi was saying. It is chemically the same as the Earth. And that's the main reason that they figure it wasn't just a capture, because there's too much similarity chemically between the Earth and the moon for it to be a coincidence. They were formed out of the same stuff. And so, yeah, I very much like thinking of what is the similarity and what are the differences with Earth processes. And one of the crazy ones is time, because on the moon, the youngest features like Tycho, with its rays going 3,000 kilometers around the moon, it's 1 billion years old. And we call that the Proterozoic on Earth. That's for early life. You know, that's when there was, you know, a bit of blue-green algae around. Whereas that's kind of the end of the game of interesting things on the moon.
Yeah, so there's very little major active stuff we're going to see.
You know, there was a flash of light during the 2017 eclipse that was recorded by people all over the world. And the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter subsequently was able to find a new crater, one that wasn't there in a previous image. It's very small. Yeah, the reason that the craters are mostly in that 3 billion sort of time scale is because there was a lot of junk out in the solar system then. And now it's mostly been swept up by the planets.
Randy, can you take a couple of geological questions?
I'd love to.
Okay, so the seas are basalt, right?
Right.
So the light areas, what?
The mineral is called plagioclase. It's a feldspar. It's one of the, you know, with quartz, it's the second most common rock forming mineral on Earth. And the rock name is called anorthite.
Oh, okay.
So it is a very low silica, feldspar rich sort of rock.
So was there a volcanic period to the moon? And
Yeah.
that's what laid down all the flat seas?
Exactly. Okay, I'm trying to get my head around this, David, and I'm not there yet. But you started with basically a molten moon. The surface got hard enough that collisions were frozen into it, but that gets us from 4.5 to about 3.8 billion years ago. And then there was this period, and they figure it was only 70 million years long. Like, it's a snapshot compared to the billions of years, when there was sufficient heat that there was this great melting, and it filled in the large basins.
Okay.
And what is really cool as an observer is it went flat on the surface of the moon, basically the same way that the ocean of the Earth is curved in that sphere. The mare are flat enough that you can actually see the sun sweep across it. Like, you can look at some of the large craters or the small mare, and you can see the light smoothly going across the surface, this flat surface of the moon. And it's so incredibly flat that it's remarkable. But then there are little wrinkles on it too, which are kind of fun.
Yeah. But the craters you see on it are more recent than that.
Not necessarily. There are ghost craters. I love ghost craters. These are craters that were big enough that the rims go above where the basalt filled in.
Oh, God.
And
Gotcha.
they're just awesome.
Can you tell the difference?
Well, they're hard to see. I mean, that part of the fun of ghost craters is you got to catch the light just right.
So that's one thing we didn't talk about tonight, is the fact that the visibility of a lot of these craters are subject to that location of that terminator, right? So as it gets lit, craters appear and disappear.
That's really, really important. And like this scarp here, it's only lit so nicely because the sun is going straight on it, whereas around it, it's in shadow. But when the sun is going straight down, like on a full moon, that's completely invisible, because left and right of that cliff, they're all being lit equivalently.
Right.
Randy, do you have any more pictures? Because I thought what I could do is, oh yeah, more.
Well,
okay,
I just wanted to.
When you're,
this was this morning. Oh, I didn't change the time. I meant to put the time on. This was at 2 o'clock in the morning. I just stole it from this little text. This morning, it was very pretty, but the full moon, and we're just a bit past full moon. 2 days past full moon. It's the anti-sun. So when the sun is very high at noon, then the moon is low at midnight. Okay, and so the moon this morning was only about 15 degrees above the horizon, and it went through a lot of atmosphere, and it was very, very wibbly. And so looking back at my sketches, so this one was from April 2019, and this one is May 2020, and this is June 2021. And it really was a bit unsatisfying, but I didn't see as many details. I did notice something here which doesn't have a name, and I got to find out a bit more about it. It's kind of a D-shaped crater with a big, big thing in the middle. I don't know anything about it. It's just, I noticed it this morning, and you can see that there's something going on there and here, but it was really, really clear that it was like a little racetrack that you could look around.
So Randy, would you say it was true that a feature could appear and disappear within a couple of hours?
Okay, the answer is yes. A lot of the time things just go into shadow. The famous one, and it was not discovered, but it was kind of made popular by a Canadian, by oh, help me, what's his name in Halifax?
David Chapman.
David Chapman is the Lunar X. Yeah. So this is just a very fortuitous set of crater rims that when the light captures it, you see this X in what is otherwise shadow, and it seriously only lasts a couple of hours. I've seen it, maybe 3 times.
So, Randy, this is actually a video clip from our interview, and I wanted to make sure that I showed this because I remember Mike repeatedly asking me, "You have not shown my favorite picture yet." So yes. This is the clip. This is the clip of this. See if we can find the spot here.
And he's local, but really there's only a handful of people worldwide that are doing this sort of quality pictures.
I would say so, yeah.
There's no sound, eh?
Is the video playing?
Were you not able to see it?
We couldn't hear anything.
Oh, okay.
Great images.
Yeah.
Okay, let me make sure.
I only saw a freeze frame of it. I don't know if it played.
Different illuminations of the features.
Yeah. Yeah.
And clearly the different seeing conditions. Plus, he changed telescope. I'm borrowing an 8-inch now from the club,
Okay, we're not
so
quite
I'm
at
seeing
that spot yet, but
some things with that. Although I keep going.
I think it's at 49 actually.
Started with the picture of your gear.
Okay, we're getting close to it.
Kind of just did a 5-minute saying what you're doing, because I think if you can't come, it would be really nice to just have you kind of go through.
Kind of intro your technique and stuff, or
can do that.
So that's Mike.
I don't want you to miss my favorite image, though. You still haven't got to it. There, you see, you hit it. That was it. The last one. The last one.
This one.
There it is.
Oh.
Yeah, that's my favorite.
Okay, pause it, David.
Now, the view is now turned 90 degrees.
Right. So can you point that little mountain that he likes so much with its, yeah, he just loves that he got that mountain with its long, long shadow. And it's a long shadow because
it's quite long.
That's like just before sunset on Earth. And you know, when you stand and you can see how long your shadow is. So that's a feature that he just loves. That's in the that's Atlas Hercules up.
Go ahead, Randy.
No, go ahead.
Okay.
On the left.
Yeah. But the mountains there and that one peak again with the really long, tiny shadow. I love this.
You know, this has a dimensionality that makes me feel like I would fall off.
Yes,
like I'd be hanging on to the edges of this rough pieces.
Yes. It's all that and other reasons, but yeah, I love this image. It gives the same kind of feeling to me, David. You feel like you're going to have to hang on.
Yeah, I really. Pardon me,
Mike. Which is your favorite mountain? You said there's a mountain that you really like there.
Well, in this image, it was the same one I was talking about before. The little tiny one that's isolated with the long pencil shadow, way over, more to straight right there in the height, but over to the right. No, it's a little tiny,
It
tiny one
takes
in the
me a
middle
while to
there,
find
right
it.
in the right at the beginning of the mirror, from coming from the bottom.
Find it.
Oh,
No. You already found it before. I was talking about the long pencil shadow that it has.
long pencil shadow.
Yeah, it's like in the middle of the image, about
Here?
2/3 in the way up.
No, go up. Go
In the
up.
middle of the image, about there. There.
Yeah. This is tilted. That's why.
Yeah.
Last time I saw it, it was flipped
Yeah,
around.
no, that's right. I'm 90 degrees. Yeah.
Yeah. So there it is, and there's the shadow.
Well, the reason I love it so much is because it was spectacular visually.
Yeah. I can see that.
Like my battery died around this time. This was like my last one, my last shot here.
Now I'll tell you, this is the drama of getting in close, because you don't get this feeling when you're looking with a small refractor and just looking at the whole moon. You don't get this level of detail.
Right. Yeah.
But when you hone in on this stuff, you see these kind of really dramatic details, like these things here.
Yeah.
And here.
And it's a little bit later. Now, we didn't see it because our session was almost done here. But as the Terminator moves, the size of those shadows that are going to be coming off that mountain range are phenomenal.
So that's the Caucasus, by the way.
Yes, yeah. About talking to the moon as I learn how to pronounce all this stuff that I've been reading, right?
I hope. It's Mare. I do know that it's not Mare.
Mare. Okay, so I've just returned to an image area where I can actually zoom in and zoom out. So this is some of the area that he sent to us.
So that's the Mare Nectaris.
Yes. And there's
you've got
some other.
You've got those three craters, Cyrillus, Katerina, and what is the other one? But they're
Katerina is the one at the bottom, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, they're completely different age craters, but they're a real landmark.
The one at the top is a great example of a complex crater, like the definition.
Yeah. You know what amazes me about some of these is it's not a single spire. Like in some cases, they're kind of like a double spire, like here.
Yep.
And then this one's kind of all clumped. Oh, one other thing I should mention, because Mike is focusing in so close here, he often has to do mosaics. So this is actually a mosaic. And when he's looking for the really fine detail, he has to also use the faster camera. It happens to be smaller, but it has a faster frame rate.
What telescope is he using with that camera?
He's using a Vixen. Actually, I've got the stats here.
Because it's not particularly big.
No, this one would have been done with the Vixen Field Massitov. It's got a focal length of just under 2,000. It's an f 9.75, and this is the one where he's using the 2 megapixel camera. The other wider shots are actually done with a refractor.
So 200, that means an 8-inch.
Yes.
No power mate or anything?
Yes, he is. He's using something that I've never heard of. It's called a Siegfried something, and it sounds like it's some kind of variable Barlow, and I've never heard of a variable Barlow, but apparently it is.
Is that what's also known as the dumbbell crater?
Which one is that? This one
Well,
here?
the one, no, not that one. The next, like the one that looks like a dumbbell with 2 parts, and then the thing in the middle, right there. Yeah, it's like a dumbbell, right?
Oh,
No?
right.
Yeah, I know the one you're talking about, but I don't think it's this one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Mike has a lot of these just amazing close-up shots. As I say, many of them are mosaics, so they're really deep shots.
But he said, David, that you can't zoom in on the close-ups where you can on the full moon ones.
Ah, okay. Let's
But
see
I
if
don't
can
know what
find
that
those.
means.
That's some at the front.
So take one of the full moon ones. There's two images from that 15th and 16th that have the whole, the whole visible moon.
Yeah, let's see if I can find those.
Or maybe you're already zoomed in.
No, these are the 290. These are the small frames. Here's one.
Wow. So he said this one you can zoom in a lot.
Let's see. See if I can do it this way.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. Anyways, it's still amazing to just look at the top all the way down to the bottom. It's got this amazing detail. I mean, it's really, through no exaggeration, looks three-dimensional. The other thing, Randy talked about dynamic range, being able to see lots of levels of illumination, which is very difficult. But one of the benefits of the Lucky imaging is not just the culling and the choice of the sharpest images, it actually increases dynamic range as well. So stacking actually increases the dynamic range.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I notice is that I do not see nearly this much detail far from the Terminator. So I think he's doing some magic or some processing to make it so that even far from the, when you get towards the rim,
yeah,
you're still seeing a lot of things.
Yeah. Yeah, he has a number of his images on our Zenfolio site as well. So I kind of recommend that you check those out too. I'm going to see how I can get it. Oh, here we are. Did you have any other images, Randy, or?
No, that's what I wanted to show tonight.
Does anybody have any questions about what they've seen tonight? Oh, Ruhi, did you find the dumbbell crater?
I did. Yeah. Let me.
Oh, you want to show it?
Sure. This is what the dumbbell crater.
Oh, no kidding. I don't know that.
Looks like a peanut.
It does look like a peanut.
They should call it the peanut crater.
Yeah, the one Lori thought was the dumbbell crater looks more like a dumbbell to me than this one.
You've got Randy curious now.
Although, no, it's 2 kilometers by 0.8. It's pretty small.
Okay.
But that's wild.
Yeah.
It's a cool crater.
So before we leave this, Randy, what are your favorite times to sketch? Favorite phases of the moon?
You know what? I always love when I can get up in the middle of the night because I don't have anything the next day. So a Friday night to Saturday morning like I just had. It'd be nicer if the seeing were better because it was like it was underwater last night. But that is absolutely my favorite because nobody cares about what I'm doing then. I often see deer. Because I live under streetlights. Lunar astronomy is really the only thing I can do from my house. But that is a wonderful time, and there's no time limit. And it's usually after I've had a sleep. You sleep for a couple of hours, then I don't know. I feel wide awake then.
Did you attend the first day of the GA where Fiona, one of the youth members, was talking about her experience with astrophotography? She mentioned exactly that. People asked her what it was like to do astrophotography, and she did not fail to mention the ambient sounds.
Spend on it, you should be sleeping. Having kids left home, that really makes a big difference.
Great.
But also the only time it's dark is from like 1 to 2 in the morning during these terrible summer days.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really giving the EA team, Deep Sky people, a break, because I know it's not a great time for them to accumulate any imagery. So I'm hoping to have them back as as the time gets darker.
And they use the full moon around the summer solstice as the date for the General Assembly, because they know that most people have no intention of taking their telescopes out during this week.
Outside of even the heat wave. So did you want anything to add, Ruhi, from tonight?
I do have a question for Randy. I know you do a lot of lunar sketching. Do you do any, I know you don't see a lot of detail on our planets, but do you do planetary sketching? Because I know Saturn and Jupiter are up right now if you're awake at 2 a.m. But
I have another passion, which is the Galilean moons, but that's mostly about positions, not the details. With the equipment that I have, I vaguely see stripes on Jupiter. I vaguely see the rings on Saturn. One of my goals is to see the Cassini division. I still haven't caught that with my own equipment. Maybe I'm going to have to do that up at the VCO, at the Rask Observatory. It's one of my goals.
Soon we hope. Anyways, I guess we're going to say goodnight, and thank you for being with us. Going to hand control back to the main board. Galvin, are you there?
Yeah, I guess that's me. And I'll just, yes, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes. Yes.
I'm here to say goodbye. And good night, everybody. Thank you, David, Lee, Ruhi, Randy. That was really awesome, especially seeing those sketches and also really detailed photographs of those craters too. That was something.
Yes, thank you.
I also apologize. I'm trying to run the stream here, and it was cutting out regularly, so that's just something I have to deal with for YouTube. But otherwise was running nicely. All right.
I think the heat is affecting a whole bunch of things, because the internet has been a little iffy tonight too here. So same thing.
Yeah, it's affecting me.
Thanks everybody. Thank you so much for coming and helping out on this day. This is wonderful. And thank you to Pat and Aaron and Ben and everybody else, and of course Scott and Jenny for their work today. So we'll have you back on the 10th of July, and if everything goes well, on the 10th of July we might have the solar telescopes out, and we might have some other streaming from some of the other telescopes. We'll see what happens up there. So we'll try that for sure. Okay.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night.